In this video, we will talk about the workflows used to automate the application deployment following a blue-green deployment strategy. The workflows used for the purpose of this demonstration are created based on actions which are part of the action packs from the Atomic Marketplace. We will first talk about the trigger deploy workflow and the deploy workflow used to transition our application from the deployed state to the deployed state. The trigger deployment workflow, which we will open in a moment, is composed of actions from the DM action pack. The DM action pack comes as a standard in the ARA bundle. The actions used in this workflow have the purpose of getting the dynamic properties of their application from the initial state, everything that has to do with profile, environments, and the parameters which are related to the entities of the application, setting these dynamic properties for all of our components, and at the very end, executing the next workflow, which is the deploy workflow. We are now looking at the deploy workflow. The deploy workflow determines which point is available at the time of your deployment based on the profile blue or green, and deploys the application to the available endpoint. The workflow includes separate sub-workflows with different purposes. The first workflow we will talk about is the database workflow. The database workflow uses standard actions from a MS SQL pack to deploy the database component. The actions which are used have the purpose of creating the MS SQL database and executing SQL scripts in parallel to set up everything related to the database. The second component workflow, or the second component to be deployed, is the Docker container, which hosts our application. Deploying this component is a two-step process. Therefore, we have two separate workflows which have the purpose of deploying the Docker container hosting the application. First, we will create the Docker image, and then we will deploy the image. Creating the image uses actions from the Docker action pack. We will first pull a Docker image from a public Docker repository. The workflow checks if there was a previously created image directory and deletes this one in order to replace this with a new directory under the same path. Another action from the Docker action pack is used to create the container from the existing image. Once all the files are in place, we will spin up the container. And what the deploy workflow does is basically just deploying the Docker container with our application on the available endpoint. After this is done and everything is set, including the dynamic properties of our application, we'll then just change actually the package state for our application. For this, we have created another workflow, which is of type general, and this contains actually only one single action, which is again from the DM action pack. And what it does, it sets the package in a new state. This state is the deployed state. There are a few other workflows which are worth mentioning in the context of a blue-green application deployment. The switch workflow is meant to switch the load balancer and make the blue or green endpoints live and available. The switch back workflow switches the routed traffic back to the previous version of our application. By using the mark stable workflow, we will mark our application package as a stable version in production. The trigger undeploy and undeploy environment workflows are used for housekeeping. The first one triggers the undeployment of our application based on the current package profile, and the undeploy environment frees up our environment, removing the Docker container from the environment.